Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Thursday, February 12th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Here in California, it's pretty common to hear about El Niño and La Niña climate patterns. But as the climate changes, meteorologists are having to review how they predict which pattern we will get each year.
We might not be seeing as pronounced of impacts as we may have expected in the past from, say, like an El Niño or something like that, but maybe more from a La Niña.
Coming up, we speak with a meteorologist who will break down this change and why it matters to us here in the Valley. But first, these headlines. A bipartisan group of representatives is pushing to advance a bill that would regulate biolabs nationwide. Valley Representatives Jim Costa, David Valadao, and Vince Fong joined 3 other members of Congress in a letter on Wednesday. In it, they ask House leadership and the Energy and Commerce Committee to move quickly on legislation that was previously introduced. The proposal seeks to strengthen safeguards against illegal biological laboratories. And this comes in light of an illegal biolab that was discovered at a home in Las Vegas that had ties to the same person who operated one in Reedley. Cases of tuberculosis in California have fluctuated since the COVID-19 pandemic, rising and falling over the years. But 2 Central Valley counties have experienced an increase in recent years, including Fresno County. KVPR's Israel Cardona Hernandez has the details.
The Fresno County Public Health Department reported a nearly 33% increase in tuberculosis cases between 2020 to 2024. During the same period, Merced County experienced a 10% increase in TB cases. Last year, 6 people lost their lives due to this disease. Dr. Samer Al-Sigbini is an infectious disease specialist at the Kaiser Permanente Hospital in Fresno. He says Fresno County is a large county, which could be a reason for the high cases of TB.
Fresno County is a unique mix of immigrants, foreign-borns, people who were before, applying for asylum, refugees. And so you have lots of seasonal workers. They come here for a few months and they leave to another state in 2 or 3 months later. Most of these workers also, they don't seek any medical care until they don't want to miss work.
Health officials are still compiling data from last year, but they expect the cases to also show a rise. Dr. Sarbini suggests that anyone with TB symptoms should see a doctor as a precaution. For KVPR News, I am Israel Cardona Hernandez.
There's a whole industry of private companies that help military veterans get their VA benefits. And securing these benefits can be a complicated process, and the assistance often comes with a hefty price tag. Governor Gavin Newsom signed a new law this week that will end that practice in California by the end of the year. Adam Ashton with our partner Cal Matters has been hearing from vets caught up in this system.
I talked to one veteran from Kern County who faced a $5,500 bill after using one of these companies. And that was a multiple of 5 of his benefits. And this new law means that private companies can't charge you a fee if you're looking for help with a veteran's claim. And that's going to cause several companies to either go out of business in California or dramatically retool how they operate when they approach veterans to help them with veterans' claims.
That's Cal Matters' Adam Ashton. Ashton says California is one of 11 states that have moved to put these sorts of companies out of business. Yosemite National Park is preparing to welcome thousands of visitors for the annual viewing of Horsetail Falls. The natural phenomenon occurs during a brief window each February. Visitors at sunset will be able to see light illuminate the waterfall on El Capitan. It creates a striking fire-like glow. Park officials say they expect Horsetail Falls to light up between now and February 26. However, it all depends on the weather conditions.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from the members of KVPR. Join at $8 or more per month and access ad-free NPR podcasts through NPR Plus. Give now at kvpr.org/donate.
And now to our main story. You're likely familiar with the terms La Niña and El Niño in the context of the weather. They're climate patterns that meteorologists use to predict how cold and wet a winter is likely to be. But these terms have become increasingly inaccurate, and that's partly due to climate change, which is raising baseline temperatures in the ocean that had been used to define these terms. So now meteorologists with the federal government are changing how La Niña and El Niño are defined. To learn more about why and what this means for local weather forecasts, we spoke with Anthony Edwards, a staff meteorologist at the San Francisco Chronicle. He spoke with my colleague, KVPR Associate Editor Carrie Klein, who starts this conversation.
So before we get into more about your recent reporting, Anthony, I was wondering if you could first cover some of the basics. So what are La Niña and El Niño, these weather patterns?
That's a great question. I think El Niño and La Niña have reputations in California that maybe aren't actually true. El Niño and La Niña aren't weather. They're actually climate patterns that are caused by water temperatures all the way in the equatorial Pacific Ocean. So we're talking a few hundred miles west of the South America continent, so like off the coast of Peru, for example. And so if waters in these regions are more than a half degree Celsius above normal for an extended period of time, several months, then we are classified as El Niño, and La Niña is just the opposite, with cooler than normal waters to the same magnitude.
Gotcha. Okay, so these are climate patterns that are determined based on the temperature of ocean water out in the Pacific Ocean, a specific part of the Pacific Ocean.
Exactly.
And then La Niña typically is cooler and wetter versus El Niño, which is typically hotter and drier, correct?
Yeah, so these are big generalizations for California, right? California is a really big state. And as people in California know, most of our precipitation comes in a pretty short window, roughly, say November to March, more or less. And that's because this thing called the jet stream, which drives storms, moves around and it dips south in winter. And so El Niño and La Niña impact the jet stream behavior. Typically, the jet stream comes a little bit more out of the subtropical area during El Niño, and that can bring more moist air and warm air, especially towards Southern California. So in an El Niño year, most climate predictions would say that Southern California has increased odds above normal precipitation, whereas in La Niña, that's the opposite. There's probably a higher chance of less precipitation in Southern California, whereas like Northern California up toward the Oregon border is just the opposite.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so we're here to talk to you today because you recently reported about changes at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. It's a federal agency. And scientists there recently announced they would update how they classify La Niña and El Niño. Can you first talk about what prompted this change?
Yeah, well, the climate is changing over, the past few decades, especially the past half century or so. The oceans globally have warmed dramatically. And so that doesn't mean that, we won't be seeing like El Niño or La Niña anymore. But what it means is that the baseline for those things has changed. So water that was meeting that threshold in the past, say like a La Niña threshold for cooler than normal water, was no longer meeting that threshold in today's climate, just because the oceans have warmed everywhere. But what makes La Niña and El Niño such a sort of unique pattern is their anomalies, which basically means the departure from normal. So even if all the global waters have warmed and this area, let's say, has cooler than normal water like it is this year near the tropical equatorial area, that means that we wouldn't really be reaching that La Niña threshold in the past climate, or are really close. But the standards have changed, and now instead of just comparing this area to, let's say, what the waters were over the past 30 years average, they're just comparing this small region in the equatorial area to the entire tropical global area.
Okay, so this is all super interesting, and involves a lot of really cool science, atmospheric science, ocean science, physical sciences. But for those who are not in the sciences, why is this significant? How could a change like this affect everyday people living here in the San Joaquin Valley or in any part of California?
Sure. So like I mentioned earlier, there is a lot that Californians may, conclude about El Nino or La Nina ahead of time. It doesn't mean people should be alarmed by this change. It just means scientists have a better understanding. So, for instance, in this coming year, there's a high probability, or at least higher than normal probability, that we will be returning to an El Nino, which typically means that Southern California in the winter of maybe 2025, 2026 would be favored for more precipitation. But in this new index, where in an old index, this looks like it could be a monstrous El Nino, it just sort of looks like maybe a more moderate event. And why that matters is because the El Nino and La Nina aren't just like a switch that's flipped. It's sort of like, when you have a light switch on your wall and you can control how bright the lights get, the higher you turn that up, the brighter the lights are going to get. So when the water is extra warm, the impacts are more pronounced. But if it's just, very subtle, you have like a dim light, then there might be lesser odds that you experience the things that you would expect. So in California, that basically means that we might not be seeing as pronounced of impacts as we may have expected in the past from, say, like an El Nino or something like that, but maybe more from a La Nina. But scientists have been really good at accounting for these things. So it's sort of like insider baseball right now. But I think it's really interesting that scientists are updating these metrics with just our understanding of climate patterns. And, Californians are really sensitive to water. And so this is really a good change for people that are pretty nerdy like me.
Okay, well, I want to shift gears a little bit. In early December, we spoke about how much Tule fog we'd been experiencing here in the Central Valley. Some foggy day records had been broken. Now, 2 months later, where do we stand right now? And are the statistics showing that it has continued to be an abnormally foggy winter?
Well, I think that the thing that would strike people that live in, say, Fresno or other parts of the San Joaquin Valley is they might think, oh my gosh, this has been like a really cold winter, especially relative to, maybe the past decade or so. But when we broaden out and look across the entire West, this has been an incredibly warm winter. And the Central Valley is really the only exception to that because of this persistent fog that you all have experienced. And so when we look at, Denver right now, they were 70 degrees the other day, and that's something that's happened a lot this winter. Really warm days. The Rockies are at a record low snowpack, especially in Colorado. Oregon's facing also a record low snowpack for early February standards. And many other states and mountain ranges are really sort of, desperate for snow. But in the Central Valley, this lack of precipitation and wind and storms has meant that this moist air from the early season storms has just kind of been trapped in there, and it's keeping a lid on temperatures, keeping things foggy. But that's all going to change in mid-February. We have storms coming in. There'll be rain. There'll be enough wind to mix out the fog. Doesn't mean there won't be cloudy days, but it's definitely going to feel different than it has for a while. So maybe that's good news for people that have been, looking for a change down there.
That was KVPR's Associate Editor, Carrie Klein, in conversation with Anthony Edwards. He's a staff meteorologist at the San Francisco Chronicle. And that is today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. You can find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.